The day my parents tried to destroy my career was the same day I realized I had the power to destroy theirs. I'm Leah Carter, and when my own mother and father called my workplace claiming I was mentally unstable, I didn't break down. I didn't cry, I smiled, because I already knew something they didn't. In 6 months, I would be sitting in the CEO chair, and they would be cleaning out their desks. But first, let me tell you how a family dinner conversation turned into the corporate war that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The signs were there long before the phone call that shattered my world, but I was too focused on climbing the corporate ladder to notice the hands trying to pull me down. Working at Meridian Technologies in downtown Austin should have been a dream come true. The glass tower on Congress Avenue housed one of the most respected tech consulting firms in Texas, and I had fought my way from intern to senior project manager in just 4 years. What I didn't realize was that my biggest obstacle wasn't the competition or the demanding clients or even the brutal hours. It was the two people who shared my last name and had been plotting my downfall from the moment I started showing promise. My parents, Robert and Diane Carter, had been fixtures at Meridian long before I arrived. Dad had worked his way up to senior director over 18 years, while Mom held the VP of Operations title she had earned through 15 years of steady, reliable service. They were the kind of employees every company treasures, institutional knowledge wrapped in professional competence, always available for late-night crises and weekend emergencies. To the outside world, we probably looked like the perfect corporate family, 3 generations working together toward common goals. The reality was far more complicated. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in October. I arrived at the office with my usual coffee and optimism, ready to tackle the implementation phase of the Henderson Group contract that had consumed my life for the past 3 months. The Henderson deal was worth $3.2 million, the largest single contract I had ever managed, and landing it had required every strategic skill I had developed since joining Meridian. Their board had been impressed enough with my presentation to specifically request that I remain as the primary contact throughout the entire engagement. My cubicle sat in the middle of the open floor plan that housed most of the project managers and senior analysts. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, earned through late nights and early mornings, and the kind of obsessive attention to detail that turned good consultants into indispensable ones. The Henderson project files were stacked neatly on my desk, color-coded and organized according to the system I had developed for tracking multiple work streams simultaneously. At exactly 9:15, Patricia Valdez from Human Resources appeared beside my desk. Patricia was the kind of HR director who never socialized with regular employees, never appeared at birthday celebrations or retirement parties, and definitely never showed up at individual workstations unless something serious was happening. Her presence at my cubicle, clutching a manila folder and wearing her most diplomatic expression, immediately set off every alarm in my professional survival instincts. "Leah, could we speak privately for a moment?" she asked, her voice carrying that particular HR tone that manages to sound both friendly and ominous at the same time. I nodded, saving my work and following her past the maze of cubicles toward the glass-walled conference rooms that lined the eastern perimeter of the floor. The conference room Patricia selected was small and sterile, designed for difficult conversations that required privacy but not comfort. She closed the door with a soft click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, then settled across from me at the round table that forced uncomfortable intimacy during terminations and disciplinary meetings. "We received some concerning information yesterday evening," Patricia began, opening her manila folder with deliberate precision. "Information that we're required to take seriously given your position and recent responsibilities with high-profile clients." The first document she placed on the table was a printed email with Meridian's official letterhead. Even reading it upside down, I could see my father's name in the sender field and a subject line that made my blood freeze: "Urgent employee concern, confidential mental health issue." Patricia turned the email toward me, and I read words that would replay in my mind for months afterward. Bob Carter, senior director, had written to Patricia, copying both Marcus Thompson, our CEO, and William Hayes, the board chairman, expressing grave concerns about his daughter's deteriorating mental state and increasingly erratic workplace behavior. The email detailed supposed incidents of volatility during recent family gatherings, claimed I had made disturbing comments about company leadership and strategic direction, and suggested that my recent professional success might be triggering some kind of psychological breakdown. Bob wrote with the authority of both a concerned father and a longtime company leader, noting that he and my mother had observed increasingly troubling patterns in my behavior over the past several months. "This is completely fabricated," I said, setting the email down with hands that I forced to remain steady. "Every single word of this is a lie." Patricia nodded as if she had expected this response. "I understand this must be shocking to read, but we have to take these concerns seriously. The complaint comes from a highly respected employee who also happens to be your father. Company policy requires us to investigate thoroughly." The second document was even worse. Diane Carter, VP of Operations, had sent a follow-up email just hours after Bob's initial message, corroborating his concerns and adding her own observations about my alleged instability. She described conversations where I had supposedly expressed paranoid thoughts about being undermined by colleagues, mentioned my growing obsession with the Henderson contract, and detailed incidents of volatile behavior during family dinners. Together, my parents had constructed a narrative of psychological deterioration that painted me as a liability to both client relationships and overall company stability. They had used their institutional credibility and intimate knowledge of my personality to create a weapon designed specifically to destroy my professional reputation. "What exactly does this investigation involve?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew that the answer would reshape my entire career trajectory. "We need to suspend your client-facing responsibilities immediately while we conduct a thorough review," Patricia explained, her tone apologetic but unwavering. "The Henderson Group implementation will be reassigned to ensure project continuity. We're also requiring a comprehensive fitness for duty evaluation with our corporate wellness provider." The fitness for duty evaluation. The corporate equivalent of being declared mentally incompetent. Even if I passed with perfect scores, the mere fact that such an evaluation had been ordered would follow me throughout my tenure at Meridian. Colleagues would whisper, clients would question my stability. Opportunities would disappear. I stared out the conference room window at downtown Austin, watching tiny figures navigate the sidewalks 24 floors below. Each of those people was living their own life, pursuing their own ambitions, completely unaware that my entire professional world was collapsing in a glass box high above their heads. "How long have my parents worked here?" I asked, though I already knew the answer carried the weight of institutional politics. "Your father has been with us for 18 years, your mother for 15, Patricia replied. "Both have exemplary performance records and strong relationships throughout the organization. 18 years versus my 4. 15 years versus my 4. The mathematics of corporate credibility were brutally simple. In any dispute between longtime institutional players and a relative newcomer, length of service and established relationships would always trump individual merit or objective performance. My parents had spent decades building their reputations as reliable, trustworthy employees. I was talented but replaceable, successful but still learning the unwritten rules of corporate survival. Walking back to my cubicle felt like a funeral march. The usual morning energy of the office continued around me, colleagues discussing weekend plans and debating lunch options, completely oblivious to the fact that one of their coworkers had just been professionally executed. I sat down at my desk and stared at my computer screen, the Henderson project files still open from the previous afternoon when my biggest concern had been selecting the right presentation template. Tyler Kim appeared at my cubicle around 10:30, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued by the strange rumors already circulating through the office grapevine. Tyler had started at Meridian 6 months after me and had become something close to a genuine friend, one of the few colleagues who saw me as an individual, rather than simply Bob and Diane Carter's daughter. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly, glancing around to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "People are saying some weird stuff about you being reassigned off Henderson." I looked up at this decent person who had always treated me fairly, and realized I was about to become a cautionary tale that would be whispered about in conference rooms for years to come. By lunch, everyone would know that Leah Carter had been suspended pending a mental health evaluation. By the end of the week, the story would have evolved into something far more damaging. "My parents called HR yesterday," I said simply, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "They told Patricia that I'm mentally unstable and unfit for client responsibilities." Tyler's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. "They what? Your own parents did that to you?" "My own parents," I confirmed, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Apparently landing the biggest contract of my career was evidence of psychological breakdown. He collapsed into the empty chair beside my desk, running his hands through his hair as he processed the implications. Tyler had met Bob and Diane at several company events and had always seemed impressed by their professionalism and apparent devotion to family success. Like most people at Meridian, he probably thought I was lucky to work alongside my parents, to have built-in mentors and advocates within the organization. "That's completely insane," he said finally. "You're one of the most level-headed people I know." The Henderson presentation was absolutely brilliant. Everyone's been talking about how impressed Marcus was with your strategic vision. The Henderson presentation. Already it felt like ancient history, a brief moment of triumph that had been systematically dismantled by two people who shared my DNA and my last name. I wondered if they had planned this attack before I even delivered the presentation, or if my success had triggered some kind of desperate response. The rest of that first morning passed in a surreal haze of administrative tasks designed to keep me busy while removing me from anything that actually mattered. I transferred client files to other team members, cleaned out project folders, and organized documents that no one would ever reference again. Each folder I handed over represented months of relationship building and strategic planning that was now being redistributed to colleagues who hadn't earned the trust I had cultivated.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The Henderson folder was the heaviest, both physically and emotionally. I had to personally walk it to Sarah Mitchell, the senior manager who would be taking over the implementation. Sarah accepted the folder with obvious discomfort, clearly aware that she was benefiting from someone else's professional misfortune, but unable to refuse the assignment. "I'll take good care of this," she said quietly, and I could tell she meant it. Sarah was fundamentally decent, which somehow made the situation worse. I would rather have lost the project to someone I disliked than watch a good person inherit the wreckage of my career. Lunch was a solitary affair at a small cafe 3 blocks from the office, where I could think without the constant background noise of corporate conversations and ringing phones. I ordered a turkey sandwich and found a table by the window, watching pedestrians navigate the Austin heat while trying to process the magnitude of what my parents had done. The betrayal went beyond simple professional sabotage. By attacking my mental health and psychological fitness, they had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They had weaponized intimate family knowledge against me, using my personality traits and private conversations as evidence of instability. Every family dinner, every casual comment about work stress, every moment of vulnerability I had shared with them had been cataloged and transformed into ammunition for their corporate warfare. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister Natalie. "Heard about your work situation. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Mom and Dad are just looking out for your best interests. Sometimes family has to make tough decisions." I stared at the message until the words lost all meaning, reading it over and over while understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. Natalie wasn't just aware of what our parents had done, she was actively supporting their decision. The three of them had discussed this situation, analyzed it, and concluded that destroying my career was somehow in my best interests. The sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I forced myself to eat it anyway, understanding that skipping meals wouldn't improve my performance during the fitness evaluation that would determine my professional future. I needed every cognitive resource available for what was coming next, and I had less than 48 hours to prepare for what would essentially be a psychological interrogation designed to validate or refute my parents' claims. Walking back to the office, I noticed details that had never registered before. Security cameras in the lobby, key card readers at every door, the way certain conversations stopped when specific people entered elevators. Meridian Technologies wasn't just my workplace, it was a carefully monitored environment where information flowed according to established hierarchies and personal relationships that I had never fully understood. My parents had spent years cultivating those relationships, building networks of trust and mutual obligation that gave their opinions weight throughout the organization. They knew exactly which fears to activate and which concerns to raise. An unstable employee with access to sensitive client information and multi-million-dollar contracts was every executive's nightmare, especially in a consulting environment where reputation was everything. The afternoon crawled by with painful slowness, as I completed busy work assignments designed to keep me occupied while preventing me from accessing anything important. filing reports, organizing archives, updating databases that no one would ever use. It was corporate theater, maintaining the illusion of productivity while systematically isolating me from meaningful responsibilities. Around 4 o'clock, an email arrived from the corporate wellness provider with detailed instructions for Thursday morning's fitness evaluation. The appointment would take place at an off-site medical facility, would last approximately 3 hours, and would include both written psychological assessments and face-to-face interviews with licensed clinical psychologists. The email assured me that the process was entirely confidential, and that results would only be shared with designated HR personnel and my direct supervisor. I forwarded the email to my personal account before deleting it from my work inbox, some instinct telling me to maintain my own records of everything that happened during this process. If my parents were willing to fabricate mental health concerns, they might also attempt to influence the evaluation results themselves. The elevator ride down to the lobby at the end of that first day felt longer than usual. I found myself studying my reflection in the polished metal doors, searching for signs of the instability that Bob and Diane claimed to observe. Did I look stressed, overwhelmed, dangerous to client relationships and company stability? What I saw was a 28-year-old professional, in a conservative business suit, hair pulled back in a neat bun, minimal makeup applied with the precision of someone who understood that appearance mattered in corporate environments. I looked tired, maybe a little thin, from too many working lunches and not enough sleep, but hardly the portrait of psychological breakdown that my parents had painted for company leadership. The lobby was busy with the evening exodus, employees streaming toward parking elevators and street-level exits. I recognized most of them by sight, but their usual nods of acknowledgement seemed strained today. Word was already spreading through the office communication networks, exactly as I had predicted it would. Walking through the parking garage to my car, I passed Bob's silver sedan in its assigned space. The sight of it made my stomach clench with a mixture of anger and betrayal that I hadn't fully processed yet. This morning I had still thought of him as my father, despite our complicated relationship. Now he was something else entirely, an active threat to my professional survival, who happened to share my genetic material. The drive home to my East Austin apartment took me through some of my favorite parts of the city, but I barely noticed the familiar landmarks. My mind was already working through the challenges ahead, analyzing the situation with the same systematic approach I used for client strategy sessions. My parents held most of the advantages in this developing conflict. They had seniority, established relationships, and the presumption of credibility that comes with years of reliable service. They also had intimate knowledge of my personality, my professional weaknesses, and my career aspirations. In any direct confrontation, they would be fighting on favorable terrain with superior resources and institutional support. But they had also made a critical tactical error. By attacking me so aggressively and so publicly, they had revealed their intentions before I was completely neutralized. If they had been smarter, they would have waited until after the fitness evaluation, until my career was already destroyed beyond repair. Instead, they had given me a narrow window of opportunity to understand what was happening and potentially respond. The question was whether I had the skills and resources to use that opportunity effectively. My apartment building sat on a quiet street lined with renovated bungalows and small complexes, the kind of neighborhood that attracted young professionals who wanted urban amenities without downtown prices or corporate housing complications. I had chosen the location specifically for its distance from both the office and my family home in Cedar Park, creating physical and psychological space between my personal and professional lives. That separation had just been violently collapsed by two people who claimed to love me more than anyone else in the world. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor unit, keys jingling in the evening quiet. The familiar ritual of unlocking my door and stepping into my own space usually provided immediate relief from workplace stress, but tonight felt fundamentally different. The apartment seemed smaller somehow, less like a refuge and more like a temporary hiding place before the next phase of whatever was happening to my life. I dropped my purse and laptop bag by the front door and walked directly to the kitchen, where I kept a bottle of wine reserved for special occasions and emergency situations. This definitely qualified as the latter. The Pinot Grigio was crisp and cold, exactly what I needed to slow down my racing thoughts and process the day's revelations with something approaching analytical objectivity. Settling onto my couch with the wine and my laptop, I began researching fitness for duty evaluations and employment law precedents. The internet was full of horror stories about employees who had been railroaded through corporate wellness programs, their careers destroyed by subjective psychological assessments that they couldn't effectively challenge or appeal. But there were also success stories, cases where employees had documented discrimination and retaliated against unfair treatment with legal action that restored their reputations and professional standing. The key seemed to be preparation and documentation. I needed to understand exactly what the evaluation would involve, what questions would be asked, and what criteria would be used to judge my fitness for continued employment. I also needed to start building a case that this entire situation was a coordinated attack orchestrated by family members with their own professional agenda. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang with a call from my mother's number. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but ignoring Diane wouldn't make this nightmare disappear, and I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with going forward. "Hello, Mom," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "Leah, honey, I heard you had a difficult day at the office," she said, her tone carrying the same false sympathy she had used throughout my childhood whenever I faced disappointment or setbacks. "Your father and I are very concerned about you." The audacity was absolutely breathtaking. She was calling to express concern about a situation that she and Bob had orchestrated themselves, as if they were innocent bystanders worried about my well-being rather than the primary architects of my professional destruction. "Are you?" I asked, "concerned about me?" "Of course we are, sweetheart. That's exactly why we felt we had to speak up when we did. You've been under so much pressure lately, pushing yourself so hard to prove something to everyone. We were genuinely afraid you might be heading for some kind of serious breakdown." I took a long sip of wine, buying myself time to formulate a response that wouldn't escalate this conversation unnecessarily. Whatever psychological game my parents were playing, they clearly expected me to react emotionally, to give them additional ammunition for their claims about my instability and professional unfitness. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure how fabricating mental health issues helps anyone involved in this situation." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the gears turning in Diane's head as she recalibrated her approach based on my unexpectedly calm response. "We didn't fabricate anything, sweetheart. We simply shared our honest observations with people who are in a position to help you get the support you clearly need. Sometimes families have to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone involved. For the good of everyone involved." There it was, the moral justification that had probably allowed my parents to sleep soundly last night after systematically destroying their daughter's career. They weren't attacking me, they were helping me. They weren't sabotaging my success, they were protecting me from myself and my own dangerous ambitions. "Help me how exactly?" I asked. "By taking away the biggest project of my career. By forcing me into a psychological evaluation that will follow me for the rest of my time at Meridian. By giving you a chance to step back and reevaluate your priorities before you make a serious mistake that could damage your long-term prospects." Diane replied, her voice taking on the lecturing tone I remembered from childhood discipline sessions. "You're 28 years old, Leah. You don't have the experience or emotional maturity to handle accounts like Henderson Group. That kind of responsibility requires judgment and stability that you frankly haven't demonstrated." I set down my wine glass harder than I had intended, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment. The conversation was moving exactly where I had known it would go, toward a fundamental disagreement about my capabilities and my appropriate place within both the family hierarchy and the corporate structure. "I landed the Henderson contract because I'm exceptionally good at my job," I said, abandoning any pretense of diplomatic family conversation. "I've been good at my job for 4 years, building client relationships and delivering results that speak for themselves. The only mistake I made was thinking that my own parents would support my success instead of systematically sabotaging it." "Your success?" Diane's voice sharpened with an edge I recognized from childhood arguments. "Sweetheart, you work for a company where your father and I have invested 18 years of our professional lives. Everything you've achieved at Meridian has been built on the foundation and reputation that we created over decades. The relationships, the institutional trust, the opportunities, none of that would exist without the groundwork we laid long before you arrived." And there it was, the core issue that explained everything. My parents didn't see my accomplishments as separate from their own professional identity. In their minds, I was an extension of their corporate legacy, a junior partner whose achievements reflected back on their judgment and mentorship rather than my individual capabilities. The idea that I might succeed independently, that I might earn recognition for my own talents and strategic thinking, was apparently intolerable to their sense of family hierarchy. "So this is really about credit," I said. "You can't tolerate the fact that people are starting to see me as separate from you and Dad. This is about family loyalty." Diane corrected sharply. About maintaining the relationships and reputation that took us decades to build. About not letting individual pride and selfish ambition destroy what matters most to everyone involved. I almost laughed at the stunning irony. She was lecturing me about family loyalty while describing how she and Bob had conspired to humiliate me in front of our colleagues. She was talking about protecting relationships while spreading false information about my mental health to company leadership. She was invoking the importance of reputation while systematically destroying the professional credibility I had spent years building through competent work and ethical behavior. I need to go, I said, suddenly exhausted by the circular logic and emotional manipulation that had defined family conversations for as long as I could remember. I have a big day on Thursday. Leah, wait, Diane said, her tone shifting to something closer to genuine maternal concern. We don't want this to turn into some kind of permanent family war. We're trying to help you even if you can't see that right now. Maybe after you've had some time to think, to get the professional help you need, we can all sit down together and figure out a reasonable path forward. A path forward that undoubtedly involved me accepting a significantly diminished role at Meridian, deferring to their professional judgment in all matters and acknowledging that my recent success had been premature and unsustainable. A path that led directly back to the supportive but clearly subordinate position I had occupied before landing the Henderson contract and threatening their sense of corporate control. Maybe, I said, though we both understood I didn't mean it. After ending the call, I sat in my living room for a long time staring out the window at the lights of East Austin while my mind processed the full implications of what had just happened. Somewhere across town, Bob and Diane were probably having their own strategic conversation, analyzing my responses and planning their next moves in this corporate chess game. They had decades of experience managing both family dynamics and professional politics, while I was still learning the complex rules that governed both environments. But they had also fundamentally underestimated me in a way that might prove to be their critical mistake. They assumed that because I was younger and less institutionally experienced, I would eventually accept their version of events and submit to their authority. They expected me to be grateful for their intervention, to recognize that they knew what was best for both my career and my personal well-being. What they didn't understand was that I had spent 4 years at Meridian, learning from some of the best corporate strategists in Austin. I had studied how successful companies identified weaknesses in their competitors and exploited those vulnerabilities for strategic advantage. I had watched Marcus Thompson navigate hostile takeovers and boardroom power struggles with patience, intelligence, and absolutely perfect timing. My parents had just declared war on someone they had inadvertently trained to fight back. The fitness for duty evaluation was scheduled for 9 o'clock Thursday morning at a medical complex in North Austin, about 20 minutes from downtown during normal traffic conditions. I arrived 30 minutes early, using the extra time to observe the facility and prepare mentally for what was essentially a 3-hour job interview disguised as a clinical psychological assessment. The waiting room was designed to be calming and non-threatening, with soft lighting, comfortable seating, and the kind of generic landscape artwork that was supposed to put anxious people at ease. I wasn't particularly nervous about the evaluation itself. I knew with complete certainty that I wasn't mentally unstable, and I was confident that any qualified professional would reach the same obvious conclusion. What concerned me was how the results would be interpreted and presented back to company leadership at Meridian. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the psychologist conducting my evaluation, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a thoroughly professional demeanor that suggested years of experience with employment-related assessments. She explained the process clearly and comprehensively, making sure I understood both my rights as an employee and the limitations of confidentiality and corporate-mandated evaluations. The written assessments were straightforward and exactly what I had expected based on my research. Personality inventories, stress management questionnaires, cognitive function tests, and hypothetical workplace scenarios that required written responses. I approached them with the same methodical precision I used for client presentations, reading each question carefully and providing thoughtful, balanced answers that demonstrated both self-awareness and professional competence. The interview portion was more challenging, not because the questions were particularly difficult, but because I had to navigate the delicate balance between complete honesty and strategic communication. Dr. Warren asked about my family relationships, my career goals, my stress management techniques, and my recent experiences at Meridian. I told the truth throughout, but I told it carefully, focusing on objective facts rather than emotional reactions and avoiding any statements that could be taken out of context or misinterpreted. When she asked directly about the concerns raised by my parents, I acknowledged that we had different perspectives on my career trajectory and professional development, but I emphasized that those differences represented normal family dynamics, rather than signs of psychological distress or workplace dysfunction. Your parents describe a pattern of increasing volatility and concerning statements about company leadership, Dr. Warren said, consulting her detailed notes. Can you help me understand their perspective on these issues? I had prepared extensively for this specific question, knowing it would be absolutely central to the entire evaluation process. My parents have worked at Meridian much longer than I have, and they've built their professional reputations around being reliable, steady employees who avoid conflict and controversy, I explained thoughtfully. My approach tends to be more direct and more willing to challenge existing processes when I believe there are better ways to serve client interests. That difference in professional style has sometimes created tension in family discussions, but I wouldn't characterize it as volatility or instability. Dr. Warren nodded, making notes that I couldn't read from my position across her desk. And the concerning statements about company leadership that they mentioned. I've been vocal about my belief that Meridian needs to continue evolving its client management strategies to stay competitive in a rapidly changing market, I said. I've also expressed some frustration with certain traditional approaches to project implementation that I think could be more efficient. If my parents interpreted those professional opinions as concerning statements about company leadership, that might explain the disconnect in our perceptions. The interview continued for another hour and 15 minutes, covering topics ranging from my childhood and educational background through my current living situation and future career aspirations. Dr. Warren was thorough but not invasive, professional but not cold. I got the distinct impression that she was genuinely trying to understand the complete situation rather than simply validating predetermined conclusions or rubber-stamping corporate decisions. When the evaluation finally concluded, Dr. Warren explained that she would compile her findings into a comprehensive written report within 48 hours. The report would be sent directly to Patricia Valdez in Human Resources, with copies distributed to Marcus Thompson and my direct supervisor. I would be entitled to review the report myself, but only after it had been examined by all relevant parties at Meridian. Driving back downtown after the evaluation, I felt cautiously optimistic about the likely results but increasingly concerned about what would happen in the aftermath. Even if Dr. Warren concluded that I was completely fit for duty and psychologically stable, my parents had already achieved their primary strategic objective. They had disrupted my professional momentum, damaged my reputation among colleagues, and forced me into a defensive position that would be extremely difficult to recover from completely. The Henderson contract was already gone, reassigned to Sarah Mitchell, with no guarantee that I would get it back even if I were fully reinstated to my previous responsibilities. Other clients would be monitoring the situation carefully, wondering whether I was someone they could trust with their sensitive business information and strategic planning. Colleagues throughout the organization would be whispering about the mental health evaluation for months, speculating about what kind of problems had triggered such drastic administrative action. But my parents had also made their true intentions completely clear in a way that eliminated any remaining illusions about our family relationship. This wasn't about legitimate professional concerns or genuine worry about my psychological well-being. This was about control, about maintaining their established position within the Meridian hierarchy, and about ensuring that their daughter understood her proper place in both the family and corporate power structures. I had a fundamental choice to make. I could accept their version of events, acknowledge that I had overreached my capabilities, and settle into the diminished role they had carved out for me. Or I could fight back with every strategic tool and professional skill I had developed over the past 4 years of corporate warfare. The decision turned out to be much easier than I had expected it to be. That Thursday afternoon, I called Jonathan Reed, an employment attorney whose name I had found through a legal referral service that specialized in workplace discrimination cases. His office was located in a converted warehouse in South Austin, the kind of creative space that signaled both innovative thinking and practical efficiency without the stuffiness of traditional law firms. Jonathan was younger than I had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the confident demeanor of someone who had built a successful practice by taking on cases that other lawyers considered too risky or politically complicated. He listened to my entire story without interruption, taking careful notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated both his legal expertise and his understanding of corporate dynamics. "This is definitely unusual," he said when I finished explaining the situation. Family members using their institutional positions to systematically undermine each other's careers. It's not automatically illegal, but it raises some very interesting questions about conflicts of interest, abuse of corporate processes, and potential retaliation. I leaned forward in my chair, encouraged by his analytical approach rather than immediate dismissal of my concerns. What kind of questions specifically? Well, did your parents follow proper channels and disclosure requirements when raising their concerns? Did they inform HR about their personal relationship to you when making the complaint? Did Meridian have adequate safeguards in place to prevent family members from retaliating against each other through corporate mechanisms? Those were exactly the kinds of procedural and policy questions I had been hoping someone with legal expertise would ask. Meridian had detailed policies governing family relationships among employees, but those policies were written with the assumption that family members would act in good faith toward each other's professional interests. The possibility that parents might deliberately sabotage their child's career had apparently never occurred to whoever drafted the employee handbook. More importantly, Jonathan continued, we need to document everything systematically and build a detailed timeline that establishes the retaliatory nature of their actions. The timing here is absolutely crucial. They made their mental health complaint immediately after your biggest professional success. That sequence suggests their motivation was professional jealousy or control rather than genuine concern about psychological well-being. Over the next hour and a half, we outlined a comprehensive strategy for documenting the situation and protecting my interests during whatever legal and corporate proceedings might follow. Jonathan would review all relevant employment policies and procedures, looking for violations and procedural errors that could form the basis of a discrimination claim. I would compile evidence of my professional competence and track any ongoing retaliation or harassment from family members or their allies within the organization. The goal isn't necessarily to file a lawsuit against the company, Jonathan explained as we wrapped up the consultation. The goal is to create enough legal documentation and procedural pressure that they have to treat you fairly going forward. Sometimes the credible threat of litigation is more powerful than actual litigation itself. Walking back to my car after the meeting, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this entire nightmare began. Genuine hope. Not naive optimism, but the strategic confidence that comes from having a concrete plan and the professional resources necessary to execute it effectively. My parents had made a calculated gamble that I would accept their attack without meaningful retaliation. They were about to discover how catastrophically they had miscalculated my resolve and capabilities. The weekend passed quietly, giving me time to organize my thoughts and prepare mentally for whatever Monday would bring. Dr. Warren's psychological evaluation report would be completed by then, and Patricia Valdez had scheduled a follow-up meeting to discuss the results and determine next steps for my employment status. Depending on those results, I would either be quietly reinstated to my previous position or forced into a more aggressive legal and professional response. Sunday evening, I received an unexpected text message from Tyler Kim, saw Sarah struggling with Henderson presentation prep. Clients are asking specifically for you. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for several minutes, understanding its broader implications for both my situation and Meridian's client relationships. The Henderson Group wasn't simply accepting the transition to new project management, they were actively questioning why I had been removed from their account and expressing dissatisfaction with the replacement arrangement. That kind of explicit client advocacy could create significant problems for company leadership, especially if it led to contract modifications, reduced scope, or outright cancellation. My phone rang a few minutes later, displaying Marcus Thompson's name on the caller ID. I answered immediately, understanding that direct calls from the CEO to suspended employees were extremely rare and usually indicated some kind of significant development in corporate decision-making. Leah, Marcus said without any preliminary small talk, we need to have a conversation. Can you come in early tomorrow morning, before your scheduled meeting with Patricia? Of course, I replied, trying to keep any excitement or anticipation out of my voice. Marcus rarely contacted employees directly, especially employees who were currently suspended pending fitness evaluations. His request suggested that something fundamental had shifted in the corporate dynamics surrounding my situation. Good. My office, 7:30 sharp. And Leah, this conversation stays completely confidential between us until we figure out how to handle the broader situation properly. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Austin feel like the most livable city in America. I dressed carefully in my most professional suit, understanding that every interaction today would be scrutinized and analyzed by people trying to assess my psychological stability and professional competence. Marcus Thompson's office occupied a prime corner of the 24th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows facing both downtown Austin and the Colorado River. The space was larger than most conference rooms, with a comfortable seating area for informal conversations and a formal desk set up for more serious business discussions. Marcus gestured toward the upholstered chairs by the windows, indicating this would be a collaborative conversation rather than a disciplinary meeting. Henderson Group called me personally on Friday afternoon. He began without any preamble or social pleasantries. They're extremely unhappy about the project management changes. They specifically requested that you be restored to their account immediately, and they made it clear that continued cooperation depends on your involvement. I maintained my composure externally, but internally I was celebrating this unexpected validation. Direct client advocacy was the most powerful form of professional endorsement in a consulting environment. When major clients specifically requested individual team members and tied their satisfaction to particular personnel decisions, it created leverage that transcended internal corporate politics and personal conflicts. Did they explain their reasoning? I asked, though I suspected I already understood their perspective. They said you demonstrated a deeper understanding of their corporate culture and strategic objectives than anyone else they've worked with at Meridian. They also mentioned that Sarah Mitchell, while obviously competent, doesn't have the same strategic vision for their digital transformation initiatives. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my reaction with the analytical intensity that had made him one of Austin's most respected technology executives. This puts us in a very delicate position, Leah. We can't ignore explicit client preferences and satisfaction requirements, but we also can't appear to be disregarding legitimate concerns about employee fitness and psychological stability. Have you had a chance to review Dr. Warren's evaluation report? I asked directly. Patricia shared the preliminary findings with me on Saturday morning, Marcus replied. Dr. Warren found absolutely no evidence of mental health issues, psychological instability, or fitness concerns. Her report explicitly recommends immediate reinstatement to full duties without any restrictions or ongoing monitoring requirements. The relief was overwhelming, but I forced myself to maintain professional composure. A positive fitness evaluation was necessary but not sufficient for completely resolving this situation. My parents' coordinated attack had created ripple effects throughout the organization that couldn't be easily undone simply by clearing a psychological assessment. So what happens next? I asked carefully. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Austin skyline as he formulated his response to this complex situation. That depends partly on your preferences and partly on how we want to handle the broader organizational implications, he said finally. We can simply reinstate you to your previous position, restore the Henderson account, and essentially pretend this entire episode never happened. Clean slate, no questions asked, minimal disruption. Or, I prompted, sensing that there was another option he hadn't yet articulated. Or we can acknowledge that this situation has revealed some serious structural problems with how we handle family relationships and conflicts of interest among employees. Problems that need to be addressed systematically rather than swept under the organizational rug. I studied his profile as he continued staring out the window. Marcus Thompson had built his reputation and career by making difficult decisions and implementing necessary changes, even when those changes were politically complicated or personally uncomfortable for people involved. The fact that he was presenting me with strategic options suggested that he saw this situation as an opportunity for broader organizational improvement, rather than simply an individual personnel problem to be resolved quietly. What kind of structural problems? I asked. The kind where longtime employees can abuse their institutional relationships and credibility to retaliate against family members without any meaningful oversight or accountability, Marcus said, turning back toward me with obvious intensity. The kind where personal conflicts get weaponized through corporate channels and official processes. The kind where talented people get systematically undermined because of family politics rather than professional performance or merit. He returned to his chair, leaning forward with the focused energy that had made him one of the most effective leaders in Austin's competitive technology sector. Your parents violated every principle of professional conduct and family decency. Marcus continued. They used their positions and institutional relationships to spread false information about your mental health. They timed their attack to coincide with your biggest professional success. They showed complete disregard for both your career and the company's client relationships. I felt a surge of validation hearing these words from someone with Marcus's authority and institutional credibility. For days I had been questioning my own perceptions and wondering whether I was overreacting to what might be legitimate family concerns. Having the CEO explicitly validate my interpretation of events was both professionally and personally empowering. What would addressing these problems systematically look like? I asked. It would mean implementing new policies and oversight mechanisms for family-related conflicts of interest. It would mean investigating whether your parents violated existing company policies and holding them accountable for any misconduct. It would mean sending a clear message throughout the organization that this kind of behavior is completely unacceptable regardless of seniority or past performance. Marcus paused, studying my reaction carefully before continuing. It would also mean potentially difficult conversations with long-term employees who have significant institutional relationships and political capital within the organization. I understood exactly what he was saying without him having to spell it out explicitly. Taking systematic action against Bob and Diane Carter would mean challenging two people who had been respected members of the Meridian community for nearly 2 decades. It would mean disrupting established relationships and potentially creating organizational conflict that extended far beyond my individual situation. And if we choose the first option, I asked, simple reinstatement with no broader action, then your parents continue working here as if nothing happened, knowing they can attack family members through corporate channels without consequences. Other employees learn that institutional seniority trumps professional ethics and individual rights. And you spend the rest of your career at Meridian wondering when the next attack might come. The choice was becoming clear, but I needed to understand all the implications before making a decision that would reshape both my career and my family relationships permanently. If we go with the systematic approach, what happens to my parents specifically? Marcus's expression became more serious, the weight of leadership responsibility evident in his demeanor. That would depend on what our investigation uncovers and how egregious their policy violations turn out to be. At minimum, formal disciplinary action and mandatory training on appropriate workplace conduct. Potentially reassignment to different departments to minimize ongoing family conflicts. In the worst-case scenario, termination for cause if we find evidence of deliberate misconduct or policy violations. I sat quietly for several minutes processing the magnitude of this decision. My parents had attacked me professionally and personally, using their institutional power to try to destroy my career for reasons that had nothing to do with my actual performance or capabilities. They had shown complete disregard for my well-being, my professional reputation, and even the company's client relationships. But they were still my parents, despite everything they had done. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. Marcus nodded understandingly. Take as much time as you need. But I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about broader organizational action, you have my complete support. Your work on the Henderson account was exceptional, and this entire situation has been a disgraceful abuse of corporate processes. I left Marcus's office feeling both empowered and overwhelmed by the weight of decisions ahead. Walking back to the elevator, I passed my father's office door and noticed his nameplate gleaming in the fluorescent hallway lighting. Robert Carter, Senior Director. By the end of the week, that nameplate might be gone forever. The meeting with Patricia Valdez an hour later was brief and anticlimactic. She formally presented Dr. Warren's evaluation results, confirmed my immediate reinstatement to full duties, and returned access to all my previous responsibilities and client accounts. The Henderson Group project was officially restored to my management, effective immediately. Is there anything else we need to discuss regarding this situation? Patricia asked as we wrapped up the administrative details. I thought about Marcus's offer to pursue systematic organizational change, about the choice between individual resolution and broader accountability. Not at this time, I said carefully. But I'll let you know if that changes. Walking back to my cubicle, I noticed how different the office environment felt compared to just a few days earlier. Colleagues who had been whispering and avoiding eye contact were now approaching with congratulations and expressions of support. Word had already spread that I had been cleared and reinstated, and the corporate rumor mill was working overtime to reinterpret recent events. Tyler Kim was waiting at my desk with a huge grin and a cup of coffee from my favorite cafe. "Welcome back," he said simply. "The place wasn't the same without you." "Thanks," I replied, genuinely touched by his loyalty during a difficult period. "It's good to be back." "Sarah Mitchell wants to talk to you about transitioning the Henderson account back," Tyler continued. "She said the clients have been asking about you constantly and she's honestly relieved to hand it back over." The strategic complexity was giving her nightmares. I spent the rest of the morning reacquainting myself with the Henderson project status and catching up on developments during my brief absence. The clients had indeed been asking pointed questions about my whereabouts, and Sarah had been struggling to maintain the momentum and strategic vision that I had established during the initial implementation phases. Around lunchtime, I received a text message from my sister Natalie. "Heard you're back at work. Hope this whole thing taught you something about family loyalty and knowing your place." I stared at the message for a long time, understanding that it represented the fundamental choice I was facing. I could accept Natalie's version of events, acknowledge that I had somehow failed in family loyalty, and return to the diminished role that my parents considered appropriate. Or I could reject their entire framework and assert my right to succeed professionally without their permission or oversight. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Thompson's direct line. "Marcus, it's Leah. I've made my decision about how to handle this situation." "I'm listening," he said. "I want to pursue the systematic approach. Full investigation, policy changes, accountability measures. Whatever it takes to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." There was a brief pause, then Marcus's voice returned with unmistakable satisfaction. "I was hoping you'd say that. Can you be in my office at 4 o'clock? I want to introduce you to some people who will be helping with the investigation and policy development process." The meeting that afternoon included Marcus, Patricia Valdez, William Hayes from the board of directors, and Jonathan Reed, who had agreed to serve as an external consultant on employment policy reform. The discussion was detailed and strategic, covering everything from investigation procedures to potential legal implications to communication strategies for managing organizational change. The first step is a formal investigation into whether Bob and Diane Carter violated existing company policies when they made false statements about your mental health, William Hayes explained. "We'll be interviewing witnesses, reviewing documentation, and examining the timeline of events to establish the facts." Jonathan Reed outlined the legal framework that would govern the investigation and ensure that all parties' rights were protected throughout the process. "This needs to be thorough but fair, professional but decisive. We can't allow personal relationships or institutional politics to compromise the integrity of our findings." Over the following weeks, the investigation proceeded with methodical precision. Company investigators interviewed colleagues, reviewed email communications, examined the timing of events, and documented the pattern of retaliation that had culminated in the false mental health complaint. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Email records showed that Bob and Diane had discussed their concerns about my growing independence and need to be reminded of family hierarchy weeks before my Henderson Group success. Witness interviews revealed that they had been questioning my judgment and competence in conversations with colleagues for months. The timeline clearly established that their mental health complaint was triggered by my professional achievement rather than any observed psychological problems. Most damaging was a recorded voicemail that Diane had left for my aunt, thinking she was leaving a message for a close friend instead. "We had to do something about Leah before she got completely out of control," the recording revealed. "She was starting to think she didn't need us anymore, that she could succeed on her own merit. Bob and I decided it was time to remind her who really holds the power in this family." The investigation concluded after 3 weeks with findings of deliberate misconduct, policy violations, and abuse of corporate processes for personal retaliation. Bob and Diane Carter were terminated immediately, their access revoked, and their reputations within the Austin business community permanently damaged by the details that inevitably leaked to industry contacts and professional networks. But the story was far from over. The policy changes that resulted from the investigation created new oversight mechanisms for family-related employment issues and established clear procedures for handling conflicts of interest. More importantly, the entire process sent a powerful message throughout Meridian and the broader Austin business community that talent and merit would be protected against institutional politics and personal vendettas. 6 months later, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Accounts, with responsibility for managing Meridian's largest and most complex client relationships. The Henderson Group implementation had exceeded all expectations, leading to additional contracts worth over $15 million and establishing me as one of the company's most valuable client managers. My parents never contacted me again after their termination. Natalie sent a single angry email blaming me for destroying the family and ruining their careers, but I deleted it without responding. Some relationships, I had learned, were too toxic to salvage regardless of genetic connections or childhood memories. The day I received my promotion to director, Marcus Thompson called me into his office for a private conversation. "I want you to know that I'm recommending you for executive leadership development," he said. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and ethical courage that we need in senior management. Thank you, I replied, understanding that this conversation represented vindication not just for my professional capabilities but for my decision to fight back against family betrayal rather than accept diminished expectations. There's something else, Marcus continued with a slight smile. The board of directors has been discussing succession planning, and your name has come up in conversations about future CEO candidates. Obviously, that's years down the road, but I want you to start thinking about what kind of leader you want to become. Walking back to my new office that afternoon, I reflected on the journey from professional victim to empowered executive. My parents had intended to teach me a lesson about family hierarchy and knowing my place. Instead, they had taught me something far more valuable: that talent, integrity, and strategic courage would always triumph over institutional politics and personal manipulation. The nameplate on my office door read Leah Carter, Director of Strategic Accounts. In a few years, if I continued developing my leadership skills and strategic capabilities, it might read Chief Executive Officer. My parents had tried to control my career trajectory by destroying it. Instead, they had accidentally launched me toward the executive suite by forcing me to demonstrate exactly the kind of leadership qualities that companies value most: the ability to stand up for principles, make difficult decisions, and transform challenges into opportunities for growth and improvement. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming everything your enemies never wanted you to be. The irony was perfect. In trying to diminish me, they had created the circumstances that would ultimately elevate me beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. They had intended to keep me in my place, but they had actually shown me that my place was at the top of the corporate hierarchy rather than cowering in their shadow. And that realization changed everything about how I understood both family relationships and professional ambition. Success wasn't something I needed to apologize for or justify to people who claimed to love me. It was something I had earned through competence, integrity, and the courage to fight for my own value when others tried to diminish it. My parents had gambled everything on a single brutal attack, believing they could destroy my career and force me back into submission. They had lost everything while I had gained not just professional vindication but the kind of strategic wisdom that would serve me throughout my entire career. In the end, they had taught me the most valuable lesson of all: that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are actually the ones standing in the way of everything you're capable of becoming. The months following my parents' termination brought unexpected revelations that transformed my understanding of corporate politics and family dynamics in ways I hadn't anticipated. As Director of Strategic Accounts, I had access to executive-level information that revealed the true scope of Bob and Diane's manipulation, extending far beyond their attack on my career. During a routine audit of departmental budgets, our accounting team discovered irregularities in expense reports and project allocations dating back nearly 3 years. The pattern was subtle but systematic: client entertainment expenses that seemed inflated, conference travel that didn't align with documented business purposes, and consulting fees paid to external contractors who turned out to be difficult to verify or contact. Patricia Valdez called me into her office on a Tuesday morning in March, her expression more serious than I had seen since the day she first showed me my parents' fabricated mental health complaint. The manila folder on her desk was thicker this time, filled with financial documents and audit reports that painted a disturbing picture of long-term financial misconduct. "We need to discuss some findings from the post-termination audit," she began carefully. "Information that directly relates to your family's situation and may require additional legal action." The documents she showed me revealed a sophisticated embezzlement scheme that Bob and Diane had operated for years, using their combined access and institutional trust to siphon money from client accounts and departmental budgets. They had been careful to keep individual transactions small enough to avoid triggering automatic review processes, but the cumulative total approached nearly $200,000 over a 3-year period. "They used your success and growing prominence as cover," Patricia explained. "While everyone was focused on your rising star and the attention you were receiving, they were systematically stealing from the company that had employed them for decades." The psychological profile that emerged from this discovery was chilling in its calculated deception. My parents hadn't just been threatened by my professional success, they had been actively using their positions to commit crimes while maintaining their reputation as model employees. Their attack on my mental health and career wasn't just about family control, it was about eliminating a potential threat to their criminal enterprise. Did they think I might discover what they were doing? I asked, studying the financial records with growing horror. "The timeline suggests they were concerned about your increasing access to departmental information and client relationships," Patricia replied. Your promotion track would have eventually given you oversight responsibilities that could have exposed their activities. Jonathan Reed, who had continued serving as our external legal consultant, joined the meeting to discuss the criminal implications of these discoveries. This changes everything about the legal landscape, he said grimly. We're no longer talking about employment disputes or workplace retaliation. We're talking about felony embezzlement and conspiracy charges. The decision to pursue criminal prosecution was made at the highest levels of company leadership, with input from the board of directors and external legal counsel. Marcus Thompson personally called to inform me that Meridian would be cooperating fully with law enforcement, and that my testimony would likely be crucial for establishing the timeline and context of my parents' behavior. I want you to know that the company will provide whatever support you need during this process, Marcus said during our private conversation. This situation has moved far beyond internal personnel matters, and we recognize that you're essentially an additional victim of their criminal behavior. The criminal investigation proceeded with methodical thoroughness over the following months. Federal investigators interviewed dozens of current and former employees, examined financial records going back 5 years, and traced the flow of stolen funds through various personal accounts and expenditures that Bob and Diane had used to maintain their lifestyle and social status. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Bank records showed systematic transfers from client accounts to personal credit cards. Email communications revealed coordination between my parents to cover their tracks and deflect suspicion. Most damaging was a series of recorded phone conversations where they discussed their growing concern about my potential access to financial information and their need to neutralize me as a threat to their operation. During one particularly revealing conversation that investigators had obtained through wiretap authorization, Diane could be heard saying, "Leah's getting too close to the departmental oversight responsibilities. If she gets promoted again, she'll have access to all the account reconciliations. We need to destroy her credibility before she can connect any dots." Bob's response was equally incriminating. "The mental health angle is perfect. No one questions family members who express legitimate concern about psychological instability. It'll tank her career prospects and eliminate any risk of her getting oversight access." Listening to these recordings in the prosecutor's office was one of the most emotionally devastating experiences of my life. Hearing my own parents discuss my career destruction in such calculating, criminal terms forced me to confront the reality that their attack on me hadn't been motivated by misguided family loyalty or even professional jealousy. It had been a calculated business decision designed to protect their criminal enterprise from potential exposure. The trial began 18 months after their termination from Meridian, drawing significant attention from both local business media and national publications interested in corporate crime stories. Bob and Diane Carter, once respected members of Austin's professional community, were now defendants in a federal embezzlement case that highlighted the intersection of family dynamics and white-collar crime. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the timeline of events and explaining how my parents' attack on my mental health and career fitted into their broader pattern of deception and manipulation. The prosecution used my testimony to establish their motive for eliminating me as a potential threat to their criminal activities. Ms. Carter, the lead prosecutor, asked during direct examination, "In your professional opinion, would your planned career advancement have given you access to the financial information that could have exposed your parents' embezzlement scheme?" "Absolutely," I replied. The director position I was being considered for included oversight responsibilities for departmental budgets and client account reconciliation. I would have had access to exactly the kind of detailed financial information that revealed their systematic theft. The defense attorney attempted to portray my parents as loving family members who had made tragic mistakes under financial pressure, but the evidence of premeditation and sophisticated planning undermined any sympathy the jury might have felt. Their attack on my career wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, it was a carefully orchestrated element of a multi-year criminal conspiracy. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Bob Carter was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, while Diane received 6 years due to her slightly lesser role in the financial aspects of the scheme. Both were ordered to pay full restitution to Meridian Technologies and faced permanent prohibition from working in financial or fiduciary positions. The day of their sentencing was surreal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sitting in the federal courthouse watching my parents in orange jumpsuits as they listened to their fate being decided by a judge who treated them like common criminals, I felt a complex mixture of vindication, sadness, and relief that this chapter of my life was finally concluding. During the victim impact portion of the hearing, I had the opportunity to address the court about how their actions had affected my life and career. I spoke about the professional damage they had caused, the emotional trauma of family betrayal, and the broader implications for trust and relationships in both personal and professional contexts. Your Honor, I said, looking directly at my parents as they sat at the defendant's table, the most painful aspect of this entire experience wasn't the attack on my career or even the criminal behavior. It was discovering that people I loved and trusted were capable of such calculated deception and betrayal. They didn't just steal money from their employer, they stole my faith in family relationships and my ability to trust the people closest to me. Neither Bob nor Diane looked at me during my statement. They stared straight ahead, their faces showing no emotion or acknowledgement of the damage they had caused to their own daughter's life. After the sentencing, reporters approached me outside the courthouse for comments about the case and its implications for corporate security and family relationships in professional environments. I kept my statement brief and professional, focusing on the importance of ethical behavior and proper oversight mechanisms rather than personal family drama. This case demonstrates that corporate crime can emerge from the most unexpected sources, I told the assembled media. Companies need robust internal controls and oversight procedures that don't rely solely on trust and reputation. Even long-time respected employees can pose significant risks if proper safeguards aren't in place. The media coverage of the trial and sentencing brought unexpected attention to my own professional story and the broader issues of workplace retaliation and family conflicts in corporate environments. Harvard Business Review published a case study based on my experience, examining how companies could better handle family-related employment issues and prevent the abuse of institutional relationships for personal gain. Several other major corporations reached out to Meridian requesting consultation on policy development and internal control improvements based on the lessons learned from our situation. Marcus Thompson assigned me to lead these consulting engagements, recognizing that my unique perspective and experience made me an ideal spokesperson for corporate governance and ethical leadership initiatives. The consulting work led to speaking engagements at business conferences and professional development events, where I shared insights about identifying and preventing internal threats, managing family conflicts in professional settings, and building resilient organizational cultures that prioritized merit and ethical behavior over personal relationships and institutional politics. 2 years after my parents' conviction, I received an unexpected phone call from my sister Natalie. She had remained silent throughout the criminal investigation and trial, apparently processing the revelation that our parents were not just professionally destructive but actual criminals who had been stealing money for years. "Leah," she said when I answered the phone, her voice subdued and uncertain. "I owe you an apology. A massive, comprehensive apology for everything I said and did during this whole situation." I listened as she explained how the criminal investigation had forced her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about our family dynamics and our parents' motivations. "I thought they were just being overprotective and maybe a little jealous of your success," she continued. "I never imagined they were actually criminals who saw you as a threat to their operation." The conversation was difficult and emotional, touching on years of family dysfunction and the ways that Bob and Diane's manipulation had affected all of their relationships with their children. Natalie had been their favored child, the one who never challenged their authority or questioned their judgment, but even she had been deceived about the true nature of their behavior and motivations. "Do you think we can rebuild some kind of relationship?" she asked near the end of our conversation. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness after how I treated you, but I'd like to try if you're willing." I considered her request carefully, understanding that family relationships damaged by betrayal and criminal behavior couldn't be easily repaired through apologies and good intentions. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "But it has to be based on complete honesty and acknowledgement of what actually happened. No more denial, no more making excuses for them, no more pretending this was just a family disagreement that got out of hand." Rebuilding a relationship with Natalie became a gradual process that required both of us to confront uncomfortable truths about our family history and the ways that Bob and Diane's manipulation had shaped our perceptions and behaviors. Through family therapy and honest conversations, we began to understand how their control and deception had affected every aspect of our family dynamics. The therapeutic process revealed that my parents' behavior toward me hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a lifelong pattern of manipulation designed to maintain their position as the central authority figures in all family relationships. They had systematically undermined my confidence and independence while rewarding Natalie's compliance and dependence, creating a family structure that served their psychological and eventually criminal needs. "They trained us to see your success as a threat to family unity," Natalie observed during one of our therapy sessions. "They made me believe that supporting your career meant betraying family loyalty. I can see now how that was just another way of controlling both of us. The family therapy process was painful but ultimately liberating, allowing both Natalie and me to understand how we had been manipulated and to develop healthier patterns of communication and support. We learned to separate our relationship as sisters from the toxic dynamics that our parents had created and maintained for decades. Meanwhile, my professional life continued to flourish in ways that exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. The speaking engagements and consulting work had established me as a recognized expert in corporate governance and ethical leadership, leading to opportunities that extended far beyond my original role at Meridian Technologies. Marcus Thompson, true to his word about succession planning, began involving me in strategic decision-making at the highest levels of the company. I was appointed to the executive leadership team and given increasing responsibility for overall corporate strategy and client relationship management. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of principled leadership that we need for the future of this organization, Marcus told me during my annual performance review. Your experience with ethical challenges and corporate governance issues has given you insights that most executives never develop, and that expertise is becoming increasingly valuable in today's business environment. The board of directors formally approved my appointment as Chief Operating Officer on a Thursday morning in September, exactly 3 years after my parents' initial attack on my career. The announcement to company employees and clients emphasized my track record of ethical leadership and strategic vision, positioning the promotion as part of Meridian's commitment to principled business practices and merit-based advancement. Standing in the executive conference room where the board had just voted unanimously to approve my promotion, I reflected on the journey from professional victim to senior executive. My parents had intended to destroy my career and force me into permanent subordination. Instead, their criminal behavior had created circumstances that accelerated my professional development and established me as a leader in corporate ethics and governance. The irony was profound and satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. Their attempt to eliminate me as a threat to their criminal enterprise had ultimately elevated me to a position where I could influence corporate culture and ethical standards throughout the organization and beyond. 6 months after my promotion to COO, Marcus Thompson announced his intention to retire within 2 years, citing his desire to focus on family and personal interests after decades of corporate leadership. The board immediately began succession planning discussions, and my name emerged as the leading candidate to replace him as Chief Executive Officer. The board sees you as the natural choice, Marcus explained during a private dinner where he outlined the transition timeline and expectations. Your experience, your ethical foundation, and your strategic vision align perfectly with where we want to take the company in the next decade. The prospect of becoming CEO of Meridian Technologies represented the ultimate vindication of my decision to fight back against my parents' attack rather than accept their version of my limitations and appropriate role. From suspended employee undergoing psychological evaluation to Chief Executive Officer in less than 4 years, it was a trajectory that demonstrated the power of persistence, principle, and strategic thinking in overcoming even the most devastating professional setbacks. The announcement of my selection as Marcus's successor came on a Tuesday morning in May, delivered to employees through a company-wide meeting where Marcus and the board chairman outlined the transition plan and their confidence in my leadership capabilities. The response from colleagues and clients was overwhelmingly positive, reflecting the reputation I had built for competence, integrity, and strategic vision. Leah Carter represents everything we value about leadership at Meridian, the board chairman said during the announcement. Her commitment to ethical business practices, her strategic expertise, and her ability to navigate complex challenges make her the ideal person to guide our organization into the future. That evening, I sat in my office, soon to become the CEO's office, looking out at the Austin skyline and thinking about the path that had brought me to this moment. The nameplate on my desk would soon read Chief Executive Officer, representing not just professional achievement but personal triumph over family betrayal and criminal manipulation. My parents had tried to teach me a lesson about knowing my place and accepting family hierarchy. Instead, they had inadvertently taught me something far more valuable: that talent, integrity, and courage would always triumph over deception, manipulation, and criminal behavior. The phone call I had been dreading finally came on a Friday afternoon in June. Bob Carter was calling from federal prison, using his allotted phone time to reach out to the daughter whose career he had tried to destroy and whose testimony had helped convict him of federal crimes. Leah, his voice sounded older and more fragile than I remembered. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything from you, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I listened as he attempted to explain his actions and express some form of remorse for the damage he had caused. "We never meant for things to go as far as they did," he said. "We were scared and desperate, and we made terrible decisions that hurt everyone we claimed to love." "You weren't scared and desperate when you planned to destroy my career," I replied calmly. "You were calculating and deliberate. The recordings from your criminal trial made your motivations very clear." There was a long pause before he continued. "I know we can never undo what we did or repair the relationship we destroyed. But I want you to know that seeing your success, seeing you become CEO despite everything we put you through, it's shown me what kind of person you really are. It's shown me what kind of people you really are," I responded. "And that's not something I can forgive or forget regardless of where you're calling from." I ended the call without saying goodbye, understanding that some relationships are too damaged by betrayal and criminal behavior to ever be restored. My parents had made their choices, and I had made mine. Their legacy was federal prison and professional disgrace. Mine was the CEO position they had tried to prevent me from achieving. The formal transition ceremony took place on a Monday morning in August, with the entire company gathered in the main conference center to witness the changing of leadership. Marcus Thompson delivered remarks about the organization's history and future, while I outlined my vision for continued growth and ethical excellence. "Leadership isn't about authority or control," I said during my inaugural address as CEO. "It's about service, integrity, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult or personally costly. That's the standard I will hold myself to, and it's the standard I expect from everyone in this organization." Standing at the podium, looking out at colleagues who had witnessed my journey from suspended employee to chief executive, I felt the weight of responsibility and the satisfaction of vindication in equal measure. My parents had tried to define my limitations and control my destiny. Instead, they had created the circumstances that revealed my true capabilities and propelled me toward achievements they never could have imagined. The final irony was perfect in its poetic justice. By trying to destroy my career, they had accidentally launched me toward the executive suite. By attempting to eliminate me as a threat to their criminal enterprise, they had created the leader who would ensure that such behavior could never take root at Meridian again. Sometimes the greatest victories are won not through revenge or retaliation, but through the simple act of becoming everything your enemies never wanted you to be. My parents had gambled everything on their ability to control and diminish me. They had lost everything, while I had gained not just professional success but the kind of character and wisdom that only comes from surviving betrayal and choosing principle over convenience. As I looked out at the future stretching ahead of me, I understood that their ultimate legacy wasn't the damage they had tried to inflict, but the strength and resilience they had inadvertently helped me develop. In trying to keep me in my place, they had actually shown me that my place was at the very top of the corporate hierarchy, leading by example and ensuring that talent and integrity would always triumph over manipulation and deceit. The nameplate on my office door now read Leah Carter, Chief Executive Officer. It represented not just a title or position, but proof that sometimes the most devastating attacks can become the foundation for the greatest achievements. My parents had intended to write the story of my professional failure. Instead, they had authored the prologue to my ultimate success. The boardroom where I would fire my parents had been meticulously prepared for this moment. Every detail had been planned with the precision of a military operation, from the seating arrangement that would place them at the psychological disadvantage to the documentation that would legally protect both the company and myself from any potential retaliation or wrongful termination claims. It was a Thursday morning in November, exactly 18 months after I had assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer. The autumn light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meridian's executive conference room, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table where some of the most important business decisions in Austin's technology sector had been made over the past 2 decades. Bob and Diane Carter had been released from federal prison 6 weeks earlier, their sentences reduced slightly for good behavior and participation in white-collar crime rehabilitation programs. Their return to Austin had been quiet and largely unnoticed by the business community that had once respected them as pillars of professional integrity and family values. What they didn't know was that I had been monitoring their activities since the day of their release, tracking their attempts to rebuild their lives and careers, while gathering intelligence about their intentions regarding both me personally and Meridian Technologies as an organization. Through private investigators and industry contacts, I had learned that they were struggling financially and socially, their reputations destroyed and their professional networks evaporated. Bob had been working part-time at a small accounting firm that specialized in tax preparation for individuals and small businesses, while Diane had taken a retail management position at a department store in a suburban shopping center. Their fall from executive positions at one of Austin's most prestigious consulting firms to entry-level service jobs represented a complete reversal of fortune that might have satisfied some people's sense of justice. But for me, their punishment was incomplete as long as they remained free to potentially interfere with my life and career in the future. The opportunity for final resolution came when they made a strategic error that revealed both their desperation and their continued inability to understand the fundamental shift in power dynamics that had occurred during their incarceration. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Bob had called Meridian's main office requesting a meeting with me to discuss family reconciliation and potential future opportunities for mutual benefit. The receptionist who took the call had been instructed to forward any contact from my parents directly to my executive assistant, who documented the conversation and immediately notified me of their attempt to re-establish contact. The audacity of their approach was remarkable in its complete disconnect from reality. They apparently believed that our relationship could be repaired through negotiation and that their criminal convictions were obstacles that could be overcome through the right combination of apology and strategic positioning. Diane had followed up with a carefully worded email that demonstrated the same manipulative communication style that had characterized their interactions throughout my childhood and early professional career. She wrote about learning from their mistakes, accepting responsibility for past errors in judgment, and hoping to rebuild family relationships that had been damaged by misunderstandings and poor communication. The email concluded with a subtle but unmistakable attempt at leverage. We understand that our situation has been difficult for everyone involved, and we're committed to moving forward in a way that protects both family privacy and professional reputations. We believe a private conversation would benefit everyone and help prevent any unnecessary complications or public attention. The implied threat was clear. They were suggesting that their silence about family matters could be purchased through some form of accommodation or reconciliation, and that refusing to meet with them might result in public statements or actions designed to embarrass me or damage my professional reputation. What they failed to understand was that I was no longer the vulnerable young professional they had attacked 3 years earlier. I was now the chief executive officer of a major corporation with access to legal resources, security personnel, and strategic advisors who could neutralize any threat they might attempt to pose. More importantly, their criminal convictions had eliminated any credibility they might once have possessed for making public statements about my character or professional competence. Their reputations were so thoroughly destroyed that any accusations or revelations they might make would be dismissed as the desperate lies of convicted felons trying to deflect responsibility for their own criminal behavior. But rather than simply ignoring their attempts at contact or having security personnel warn them away from the company, I decided to use their overture as an opportunity to achieve complete closure and ensure that they would never again pose any threat to my life or career. I instructed my executive assistant to schedule a meeting for the following Thursday morning, to be held in the main boardroom with appropriate witnesses and legal documentation present. The invitation was extended not as a family reconciliation session, but as a formal business meeting between the chief executive officer of Meridian Technologies and 2 individuals who had previously violated company policies and committed crimes against the organization. The legal team spent the following week preparing documentation that would formalize the permanent separation between my parents and any connection to Meridian Technologies. The documents included comprehensive non-disclosure agreements, permanent prohibition from company premises, and legal warnings about the consequences of any future attempts to interfere with my professional responsibilities or personal life. Jonathan Reed, who had remained as our primary external legal counsel throughout my rise to CEO, coordinated with corporate security to ensure that the meeting would be conducted safely and professionally while protecting both the company's interests and my personal security. "This is your opportunity to close this chapter permanently," Jonathan explained during our final preparation session. "Once they sign these documents and understand the consequences of any future interference, they'll have no choice but to accept that their relationship with you and this company is finished forever." The morning of the meeting, I arrived at the office early to review the final preparations and ensure that every detail had been anticipated and planned for. The boardroom had been configured with my parents seated across from me at the far end of the table, with Jonathan Reed and our Director of Human Resources positioned to my left and right as official witnesses to the proceedings. Security cameras had been activated to record the entire conversation for legal protection, and additional security personnel were stationed discreetly outside the conference room to respond immediately if the situation became confrontational or threatening. At exactly 9 o'clock, my executive assistant escorted Bob and Diane Carter into the boardroom, where they would learn that their daughter was not only beyond their ability to manipulate or control, but possessed the power to permanently exile them from any connection to the professional world they had once dominated. The contrast between their current appearance and the polished executives they had been 3 years earlier was striking and immediately apparent. Bob looked older and more fragile, his suit inexpensive and slightly ill-fitting, his once confident demeanor replaced by the uncertain posture of someone whose authority had been permanently stripped away. Diane had aged even more dramatically, her carefully maintained appearance replaced by the tired look of someone working retail jobs and struggling to maintain basic financial stability. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," Bob began, his voice carrying a combination of humility and hope that suggested he genuinely believed this meeting might lead to some form of reconciliation or accommodation. I allowed them to settle into their chairs and arrange their materials before responding, understanding that psychological positioning was crucial for establishing the proper dynamic for what was about to occur. "This is not a family meeting," I said clearly, my voice carrying the authority and decisiveness that had made me successful as a corporate executive. "This is a business meeting between the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Technologies and two individuals who have previously committed crimes against this organization and its employees." The shift in their expressions was immediate and unmistakable. They had apparently expected a private family conversation where emotional appeals and parental authority might still carry some weight. Instead, they found themselves in a formal corporate setting where their daughter wielded absolute power and they possessed no leverage or influence whatsoever. "Leah," Diane began, attempting to inject maternal warmth into her voice, "we understand that we made serious mistakes, but we're still your parents. Surely we can find a way to move forward that acknowledges both our failures and our family bond. You forfeited any claim to parental relationship when you conspired to destroy my career and committed federal crimes," I replied without emotion. "You are Bob Carter and Diane Carter, former employees of this company who were terminated for cause and subsequently convicted of embezzlement and conspiracy. That is the only relationship that exists between us." Jonathan Reed opened his briefcase and placed the legal documents on the table between us, explaining their contents and implications with the clinical precision of an experienced attorney handling a routine business transaction. "These documents formalize the permanent separation between you and Meridian Technologies," he explained. "They include comprehensive non-disclosure agreements regarding any proprietary information you may have accessed during your employment, permanent prohibition from company premises, and legal restrictions on any future contact with current employees or clients." Bob and Diane exchanged glances, finally beginning to understand that this meeting was not an opportunity for reconciliation, but a formal legal proceeding designed to eliminate any remaining connection between them and the organization where they had once held positions of respect and authority. "What if we refuse to sign?" Diane asked, her voice taking on the challenging tone I remembered from childhood arguments when she felt her authority was being questioned. "Then you will be escorted from the premises by security personnel, and our legal team will pursue additional remedies to protect the company and its employees from any future interference or harassment," Jonathan replied, matter-of-factly. "Signing these documents is not a negotiation. It is an acknowledgement of legal realities that exist whether you accept them or not." I watched my parents process this information, seeing the moment when they finally understood that their criminal convictions had eliminated any remaining power or influence they might once have possessed. They were no longer respected members of Austin's professional community with institutional relationships and social capital. They were convicted felons whose only choices were compliance or additional legal consequences. "There's one more thing," I said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked downtown Austin, the city where I had transformed from a manipulated daughter into a powerful executive who would never again tolerate threats to my professional or personal autonomy. "I'm not just the CEO of this company, I'm also a major shareholder and member of the board of directors. My influence extends throughout Austin's business community and beyond. Your criminal convictions have made you unemployable in any professional capacity that requires trust or responsibility." I turned back to face them, allowing the full implications of their situation to register before delivering the final element of their permanent exile from my life. If you attempt to contact me again, interfere with my professional responsibilities, or make any public statements about our family relationship, I will use every legal and professional resource at my disposal to ensure that you face the maximum consequences available under both criminal and civil law. The silence in the boardroom was complete except for the soft sound of papers rustling as Bob reached for a pen to begin signing the documents that would formalize his permanent banishment from any connection to his daughter's life or career. Before you sign, I continued, I want you to understand exactly what you accomplished through your criminal behavior and attack on my career. You intended to destroy my professional prospects and force me into permanent subordination. Instead, you created the circumstances that elevated me to the position where I now have the power to determine your fate permanently. Diane's hands were trembling as she picked up her pen, the reality of complete powerlessness finally penetrating the delusions of parental authority that had sustained her through decades of manipulation and control. You tried to teach me a lesson about knowing my place, I said as they signed document after document, each signature representing another layer of legal protection for my continued success and security. Instead, you taught me that my place is wherever my talent and determination can take me, and that includes positions where I have the authority to remove threats to my well-being permanently. The signing process took nearly 30 minutes, with Jonathan Reed explaining each document and ensuring that Bob and Diane understood the legal consequences of any future violations. They signed without asking questions, their spirits finally broken by the complete reversal of power dynamics that had once favored their parental authority over my individual rights and capabilities. When the last document had been signed and witnessed, I returned to my seat at the head of the table and delivered the final statement that would conclude our relationship forever. Your employment at Meridian Technologies is permanently terminated for cause effective immediately. Your access to company premises, information and personnel is permanently revoked. Any attempt to violate these restrictions will result in immediate legal action and criminal prosecution. I paused, allowing the weight of institutional authority to reinforce the finality of what was occurring. Your relationship with me as parents ended the day you decided to attack my career for your own criminal purposes. From this moment forward, you are strangers who share some genetic material and unfortunate history, nothing more. Bob attempted one final appeal to whatever remnant of family feeling might still influence my decisions. Leah, we know we can never undo what we did, but we're still your family. Surely that means something regardless of our mistakes. Family means loyalty, support, and protection, I replied. You provided none of those things. Instead, you provided betrayal, sabotage, and criminal behavior. You destroyed any claim to family relationship through your own choices and actions. Security personnel entered the boardroom at my signal, professional and courteous but clearly prepared to escort my former parents from the premises immediately. Bob and Diane gathered their copies of the signed documents and stood to leave, their posture reflecting the complete defeat of people who had gambled everything on their ability to manipulate and control, only to discover that their intended victim had become more powerful than they could have imagined. This building represents everything you tried to prevent me from achieving, I said as they prepared to leave the boardroom for the final time. My name is on the door, as Chief Executive Officer, because your criminal attack failed to destroy my capabilities or my determination. Every day that I succeed in this position is proof that your assessment of my limitations was fundamentally wrong. As the security team escorted them toward the elevator, I remained standing by the windows overlooking the Austin skyline, processing the completion of a journey that had taken me from professional victim to corporate leader with the power to permanently exile the people who had tried to destroy my future. The boardroom fell silent after their departure, leaving only Jonathan Reed and myself to review the legal documentation and ensure that all necessary procedures had been followed to protect both the company and my personal interests going forward. That was the most professionally executed termination I've ever witnessed, Jonathan observed as he organized the signed documents into his briefcase. They walked in here thinking they still had some form of leverage or influence, and they left understanding that they have no power whatsoever over your life or career. The satisfaction was profound but not emotional. This hadn't been an act of revenge or personal vindication, but rather a necessary business decision to eliminate ongoing threats to organizational stability and executive effectiveness. My parents had proven through their criminal behavior that they were willing to damage both family relationships and corporate interests for their own benefit, making their permanent removal a strategic necessity rather than a personal choice. The news of their termination and permanent banishment spread quickly through Meridian's corporate communications network, serving as a powerful demonstration of the company's commitment to ethical behavior and protection of leadership from external threats.
Employees who had wondered whether family relationships might compromise my objectivity or decision-making authority now understood that I would prioritize institutional interests over personal considerations without hesitation. The broader Austin business community took notice as well, recognizing that the new generation of corporate leaders represented by my appointment as CEO would not tolerate the kind of personal interference and ethical compromises that had sometimes characterized family-owned or family-influenced businesses in previous decades. Industry publications featured articles about the importance of clear boundaries between family relationships and professional responsibilities, using my situation as a case study for how effective leaders handle conflicts between personal loyalty and corporate governance. The coverage emphasized my commitment to merit-based decision-making and institutional integrity over family favoritism or personal accommodation.
3 months after the boardroom confrontation, I received a brief letter from Bob and Diane, delivered through their attorney to ensure compliance with the non-contact provisions of their termination agreements. The letter contained a formal apology for their criminal behavior and acknowledgement that their actions had been motivated by financial desperation rather than legitimate family concerns. More significantly, the letter included a statement renouncing any claim to future contact or relationship with me, and expressing their understanding that their criminal convictions had permanently severed any family bond that might once have existed between us. They wished me continued success in my career, and asked only that I remember them as they had been before their financial crimes rather than as the convicted felons they had become. I read the letter once and then filed it with the other legal documents related to their termination, understanding that it represented the final closure of a relationship that had been corrupted beyond repair by betrayal and criminal behavior. Their acknowledgement of responsibility and acceptance of permanent separation was more than I had expected, but it didn't change the fundamental reality that they had proven themselves untrustworthy and dangerous to my well-being. The following year brought unprecedented growth and success for Meridian Technologies under my leadership, with annual revenues exceeding $100 million for the first time in company history. The Henderson Group contract had evolved into a comprehensive partnership that generated additional business worth over $30 million annually, while my reputation for ethical leadership attracted new clients who valued integrity and transparency in their consulting relationships. My personal success story became a frequent topic at business conferences and leadership seminars, where I spoke about the importance of principled decision-making and the courage required to prioritize long-term institutional health over short-term personal accommodation. Audiences were particularly interested in how I had handled the family conflict and criminal behavior that could have destroyed both my career and the company's reputation. Leadership sometimes requires making decisions that are personally difficult but institutionally necessary. I explained during a keynote address at the National Corporate Governance Conference. Family loyalty cannot be allowed to compromise ethical standards or organizational integrity. When conflicts arise between personal relationships and professional responsibilities, effective leaders must choose the path that protects the institution and its stakeholders. The speaking engagements and consulting work led to recognition as one of Austin's most influential business leaders, with invitations to serve on nonprofit boards and civic organizations that shape the city's economic development and cultural growth. My success represented not just personal achievement but a demonstration of how principled leadership could emerge from even the most challenging family and professional circumstances. 5 years after assuming the role of CEO, I was invited to deliver the commencement address at the University of Texas Business School, speaking to graduates about the importance of ethical foundation and strategic thinking in building successful careers. Standing at the podium where distinguished business leaders had inspired previous generations of students, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from suspended employee to recognized authority on corporate leadership and governance. Your success will be measured not just by your financial achievements or professional advancement, I told the graduating class, but by your ability to maintain ethical standards when faced with pressure to compromise your principles. The greatest victories are often won by those who choose integrity over convenience, even when that choice requires personal sacrifice or professional risk. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me with questions about handling family conflicts in professional settings, sharing her own concerns about potential interference from relatives who didn't support her career ambitions. Her situation reminded me of my own early struggles with family expectations and the importance of establishing clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional goals. The most important lesson I can share, I told her, is that you cannot allow other people's limitations or fears to define your potential. Family members who truly care about your success will support your efforts to achieve your goals. Those who try to undermine or control your career are revealing their own insecurities rather than protecting your interests. The conversation reinforced my understanding of how my experience had provided valuable insights not just for my own leadership development but for helping others navigate similar challenges in their professional and personal lives. The criminal behavior and family betrayal that had once threatened to destroy my career had ultimately become the foundation for wisdom and expertise that benefited both my organization and the broader business community. Standing in the university parking lot after the commencement ceremony, watching graduates celebrate with families who had supported their educational achievements and career aspirations, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. My professional success had exceeded every goal I had set for myself, but it had come at the cost of family relationships that could never be repaired or replaced. The choice between family loyalty and professional integrity hadn't been difficult when the evidence of criminal behavior became clear, but the emotional consequences of that choice would remain with me permanently. I had gained corporate leadership and community recognition, but I had lost the possibility of family relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Yet as I drove back to the office where my nameplate read Chief Executive Officer, and my decisions shaped the careers of hundreds of employees, I understood that my parents had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, proof of my own strength, resilience, and capacity for principled leadership under the most challenging circumstances. They had intended to teach me a lesson about limitation and subordination. Instead, they had taught me that my potential was limited only by my own courage and determination to pursue excellence regardless of personal cost or family pressure. The boardroom where I had fired them would always represent the moment when I fully claimed my own power and rejected their authority over my life and career. It was the place where a damaged family relationship had ended and a new chapter of independent success had begun, built on the foundation of ethical leadership and strategic vision that no amount of manipulation or criminal behavior could ever destroy. 10 years had passed since that decisive Thursday morning when I terminated my parents from Meridian Technologies, and the Austin business landscape had transformed in ways that reflected both technological advancement and evolving leadership philosophies. The glass tower where my story had unfolded still dominated the downtown skyline, but my office now occupied the penthouse suite that had been completely renovated to reflect the company's expansion into international markets and cutting-edge digital solutions. The morning light filtered through smart glass windows that automatically adjusted their opacity based on weather conditions and time of day, casting a soft glow across the executive suite where I now conducted meetings with Fortune 500 clients and government officials from multiple countries. The transformation of both my personal circumstances and professional influence seemed almost surreal when I allowed myself to reflect on the journey from suspended employee to one of the most recognizable business leaders in the American Southwest. Meridian Technologies had grown into a multinational corporation with offices in 12 cities and annual revenues exceeding $500 million. The company's reputation for ethical leadership and innovative solutions had attracted partnerships with major technology firms, government agencies, and international development organizations seeking consulting services that combined technical expertise with unwavering integrity. My role had evolved beyond traditional corporate management into something closer to institutional stewardship, with responsibilities that included shaping industry standards, mentoring emerging leaders, and serving as a public advocate for business practices that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profit maximization. The speaking engagements and board appointments had multiplied into a comprehensive platform for influencing corporate culture and governance practices throughout the technology sector. The personal cost of this success remained significant but manageable, a permanent reminder that exceptional achievement often requires sacrificing relationships that cannot withstand the pressure of individual growth and transformation. I had learned to find satisfaction in professional accomplishment and community impact rather than family acceptance or approval, building meaningful connections with colleagues, mentees, and fellow executives who shared my commitment to principled leadership. The morning that would reshape my understanding of legacy and redemption began with an unexpected email from Sarah Mitchell, who had remained at Meridian as Senior Director of Client Relations throughout my tenure as CEO. Sarah had been the colleague who temporarily managed the Henderson Group account during my parents' attack, and she had become one of my most trusted advisors and closest professional friends over the subsequent decade. Leah, her message read, "I received an unusual inquiry yesterday that I think you should handle personally. A woman named Elena Rodriguez contacted our office asking about our leadership development programs. She mentioned that she had heard about your story and wanted to know if Meridian might be able to help her navigate a similar family situation. I told her I would pass along her information, but this feels like something that requires your direct involvement. The attached contact information included a brief description of Elena's circumstances that immediately captured my attention. She was a 26-year-old financial analyst whose parents had recently attempted to sabotage her career advancement by spreading rumors about her personal life and professional competence to colleagues and supervisors. The similarities to my own experience were striking enough to warrant immediate attention. I called Elena Rodriguez that afternoon, reaching her during her lunch break at a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Austin. Her voice carried the same combination of determination and uncertainty that I remembered from my own darkest days, when the future seemed simultaneously full of potential and threatened by forces beyond my control. "Miss Carter," she began, clearly nervous about speaking directly with someone she had probably read about in business publications and industry case studies. "I'm not even sure why I'm calling you. My situation isn't nearly as serious as what you went through, but I don't know where else to turn for advice." I listened as she described her parents' increasingly desperate attempts to undermine her professional relationships and career prospects, motivated by their belief that her success in the financial sector was somehow betraying family values and cultural expectations. They had contacted her supervisors with concerns about her dedication to family responsibilities, suggested to colleagues that her ambition was evidence of psychological instability, and even attempted to interfere with client relationships by questioning her judgment and reliability. "They keep saying they're trying to protect me from making mistakes that will damage my reputation and hurt my chances of finding a good husband." Elena continued, her frustration evident despite her efforts to maintain professional composure. "But I think they're really trying to force me back into the traditional role they think I should accept as a daughter and future wife." The psychological dynamics were familiar but not identical to my own experience, reflecting cultural and generational factors that added complexity to the fundamental conflict between individual achievement and family expectations. Elena's parents weren't criminals like Bob and Diane Carter, but they were using similar tactics of professional sabotage to maintain control over their daughter's life choices and career development. "The most important thing you need to understand," I told her, "is that their behavior isn't really about protecting your interests or preserving family harmony. It's about maintaining their authority and control over your life choices. Once you recognize that dynamic, you can start developing strategies to protect yourself and your career." We talked for nearly an hour, covering everything from documentation strategies and legal protections to psychological preparation for the difficult conversations and decisions that would likely be required to resolve her situation. By the end of our conversation, I had offered her a position as a junior analyst at Meridian Technologies, contingent on her willingness to relocate and commit to a leadership development program that would provide both professional advancement and protection from family interference. "Why would you offer me a job when you've only known me for an hour?" Elena asked, clearly surprised by the unexpected opportunity. "Because talent and determination are rare qualities that should be protected and nurtured," I replied. "And because I understand exactly what you're facing and how difficult it can be to navigate these challenges without proper support and resources." Elena Rodriguez joined Meridian Technologies 6 weeks later, bringing intelligence, work ethic, and strategic thinking that quickly distinguished her among our analytical staff. More importantly, she brought a reminder of why my own experience with family betrayal and professional sabotage had value beyond personal vindication and career advancement. Working with Elena revived my interest in systematic approaches to helping other professionals navigate family conflicts and workplace discrimination, leading to the development of a formal mentorship program that connected experienced executives with younger colleagues facing similar challenges. The program attracted participants from throughout Austin's business community and eventually expanded to include professionals from other cities seeking guidance and support for family-related career obstacles. The mentorship work led to additional speaking engagements focused specifically on family dynamics in professional settings, with audiences that included both individual contributors seeking personal advice and organizational leaders trying to develop policies that protected employees from family-based interference and discrimination. The topics I addressed had evolved from general corporate governance and ethical leadership to specialized expertise in managing conflicts between personal relationships and professional responsibilities. Family loyalty is not incompatible with individual achievement.
I explained during a keynote presentation at the National Women in Business Conference. But loyalty cannot be allowed to become a tool for manipulation and control. True family support means encouraging each member to pursue their full potential, even when that potential leads them beyond traditional expectations or comfort zones. The conference audience included hundreds of women who had experienced various forms of family pressure and interference in their professional development, and the response to my presentation was overwhelming in both its enthusiasm and emotional intensity. During the question and answer session, participants shared stories of parental sabotage, spousal interference, and sibling rivalry that had damaged their careers and undermined their confidence in their own capabilities. The most challenging aspect of family-based professional interference, observed one audience member, is that it comes from people who claim to love us and want what's best for us. How do you maintain emotional boundaries when the attacks are wrapped in expressions of care and concern? You learn to evaluate actions rather than words, I replied. People who genuinely care about your well-being will support your efforts to achieve your goals, even if those goals make them uncomfortable or challenge their assumptions. People who consistently undermine your success while claiming to protect your interests are revealing their own priorities rather than demonstrating genuine love or concern. The conference presentation was recorded and distributed widely through professional networks and social media platforms, reaching an audience that extended far beyond the original attendees. The response included hundreds of personal messages from women and men who had experienced similar family conflicts, seeking advice, sharing their own stories, and expressing gratitude for public acknowledgement of challenges that were often dismissed or minimized by traditional business and family counseling resources. The overwhelming response to my presentation highlighted the need for more comprehensive resources and support systems for professionals dealing with family-based career interference, leading to the development of an online platform that provided educational materials, legal guidance, and peer support networks for individuals facing similar challenges. The digital platform, launched in partnership with several major corporations and professional organizations, became a central resource for information about workplace rights, family conflict resolution, and strategies for maintaining professional advancement in the face of personal relationship pressures. The platform's success demonstrated the widespread nature of family-based professional interference and the urgent need for systematic approaches to addressing these challenges. As the platform grew and evolved, I found myself increasingly involved in policy discussions at the governmental and industry association level, advocating for stronger legal protections and corporate policies that would prevent family members from using workplace channels to interfere with individual career development. The work felt like a natural extension of my own experience, transforming personal trauma into institutional change that could benefit thousands of other professionals. The policy advocacy work brought me into contact with legislators, regulatory officials, and industry leaders who were grappling with the complex intersection of family relationships, workplace rights, and economic productivity. The conversations often revealed how traditional approaches to family and employment law had failed to anticipate the sophisticated forms of interference and manipulation that were emerging in modern professional environments. The law has always recognized that employers cannot discriminate based on family status, I explained during testimony before a state legislative committee examining workplace discrimination issues. But we need to extend those protections to include interference from family members themselves, particularly when that interference involves false statements about employee competence or reliability. The legislative testimony led to the introduction of bills in several states that would create specific legal remedies for employees whose careers had been damaged by family members making false statements to employers or clients. While the legislative process was slow and complex, the mere introduction of such legislation sent a powerful message that family-based professional interference was being recognized as a serious problem requiring legal solutions. The combination of policy advocacy, mentorship programs, and platform development had evolved into a comprehensive initiative that was reshaping how both individuals and organizations approached family conflicts in professional settings. The work felt like the culmination of everything I had learned from my own experience with parental betrayal and criminal behavior, transformed into resources and protections that could prevent others from experiencing similar trauma. Elena Rodriguez had thrived during her first 2 years at Meridian Technologies, advancing from junior analyst to project manager and distinguishing herself as one of our most promising emerging leaders. Her success served as validation for the mentorship approach and demonstrated how proper support and protection could enable talented individuals to overcome family obstacles and achieve their full potential. "I never imagined I could be this successful this quickly," Elena told me during her annual performance review. "Working here has shown me what's possible when you're surrounded by people who believe in your capabilities rather than constantly questioning your judgment and motivations." Her success reminded me of my own transformation from damaged victim to empowered leader, but it also highlighted how different her journey had been with proper support and institutional protection from the beginning. She hadn't needed to fight her battles alone or develop strategies for survival through trial and error, because the resources and expertise I had gained through my own painful experience were available to guide and protect her development. The contrast between Elena's experience and my own reinforced my commitment to expanding the mentorship programs and support platforms that could provide similar protection and guidance to other professionals facing family-based career interference. The work had become more than a business initiative or personal interest. It was a mission to ensure that talented individuals wouldn't have to choose between family relationships and professional achievement. On a quiet Friday afternoon in September, almost exactly 11 years after my parents' initial attack on my career, I received an unexpected visitor who would provide the final piece of understanding about legacy, redemption, and the complex relationships between personal trauma and professional purpose. My executive assistant announced that Leah Carter had requested a meeting, explaining that she had been waiting in the lobby for nearly an hour hoping to speak with me without an appointment. I hadn't seen or spoken with my sister in over 3 years, despite her attempts to maintain some form of relationship through occasional emails and holiday cards that I had generally ignored. Natalie looked older and more mature when she entered my office, her appearance suggesting both personal growth and the kind of hard-won wisdom that comes from facing difficult truths about family relationships and personal responsibility. She carried herself with a confidence that I hadn't observed during our previous interactions, when she had seemed caught between loyalty to our parents and recognition of their destructive behavior. "I know I don't have the right to take up your time," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk with obvious nervousness. "But I wanted you to know that I've been following your work with the mentorship programs and policy advocacy. What you're doing to help other people avoid what happened to you is remarkable, and I think you should know how proud I am of what you've accomplished." I studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas that might explain her unexpected appearance and expressions of support. But her demeanor suggested genuine admiration and perhaps regret for the role she had played in our family's dysfunction and the damage that had been inflicted on my career and emotional well-being. "I also wanted to apologize," she continued, "not just for how I treated you during the worst of the situation with Mom and Dad, but for all the years when I failed to support your ambitions and achievements. I was so focused on maintaining family peace and avoiding conflict that I never stood up for you when you needed someone in your corner." The apology was unexpected and emotionally complex, touching on years of family dynamics and missed opportunities for genuine sisterly support and advocacy. Natalie's acknowledgement of her own role in enabling our parents' destructive behavior was both validating and painful, confirming my memories of isolation and lack of family support during crucial moments in my personal and professional development. "I've been in therapy for the past 4 years," Natalie explained, "working through my own issues with family loyalty and codependency. It's taken me this long to understand how much damage I contributed to by always choosing the path of least resistance instead of standing up for what was right." We talked for over an hour about family history, personal growth, and the possibility of building some form of adult relationship based on mutual respect rather than childhood roles and dysfunctional patterns. The conversation was difficult, but ultimately healing, providing closure for family wounds that had remained unresolved despite my professional success and personal development. "I don't expect forgiveness or reconciliation," Natalie said as our conversation neared its conclusion. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now what you went through and how much courage it took to stand up for yourself when no one else in the family would support you. Your success isn't just professional achievement, it's proof that you made the right choices, even when they were incredibly difficult." After Natalie left my office, I sat quietly for a long time, processing the unexpected emotional resolution and reflecting on how my experience with family betrayal had ultimately led to both personal empowerment and the ability to help others facing similar challenges. The pain and trauma that had once threatened to destroy my career had become the foundation for expertise and advocacy that was making a meaningful difference in other people's lives. The mentorship programs had expanded to serve hundreds of professionals annually, while the policy advocacy work was beginning to influence legislative and corporate practices throughout the country. The platform had become a recognized resource for workplace rights and family conflict resolution, with partnerships that included major universities, professional associations, and government agencies. Most importantly, the work had given meaning and purpose to experiences that might otherwise have remained sources of permanent bitterness and emotional damage. The betrayal and criminal behavior that had characterized my parents' attack on my career had been transformed into wisdom, expertise, and resources that were helping others navigate similar challenges more successfully than I had been able to manage alone. As the sun set over Austin's skyline that evening, casting long shadows across the city where my professional journey had begun over a decade earlier, I understood that my parents had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, proof of my own resilience and the opportunity to transform personal trauma into institutional change that would benefit countless other professionals facing family-based career interference. The nameplate on my office door would always represent more than personal achievement or professional advancement. It symbolized the possibility of transforming devastating attacks into empowering victories, of building institutional change from personal experience, and of ensuring that individual success could become a platform for protecting and supporting others facing similar challenges. My parents had tried to teach me a lesson about limitation and subordination, but they had actually taught me about unlimited potential and the responsibility that comes with achieving positions of influence and authority. Their criminal behavior and family betrayal had been intended to destroy my future, but it had ultimately created the foundation for a legacy of advocacy and support that extended far beyond my own career or personal satisfaction. The boardroom where I had fired them would always remind me that sometimes the most devastating attacks become opportunities for the most meaningful victories, and that the courage to stand up for principle and integrity could transform not just individual lives, but entire systems and institutions. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.